Hello and welcome to another special episode of the Offside Musings Podcast. My name is Okey Ndibe. It's my delight to welcome you on behalf of my co-host, Emeka Onyagwa. Today we're going to be looking at several issues in Nigeria's ongoing political odyssey. First, we're going to be looking at the state of the political campaigns in Nigeria, especially the much observed presidential race featuring three candidates who are considered frontrunners, and that's Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, Peter Obi of the Labour Party, and Ahmed Bola Tinubu of the All Progressives Congress. So we're going to X-ray the latest developments in that race and pay particular attention to a recent poll and what it says about where the race stands today. We're also going to look at events in Ebonyi State where the governor, Mr. Umahi, has come up with a rather harebrained idea to name a stadium under construction after a former Nigerian dictator, Sani Abacha. Finally, we're going to look at recent developments in the Labour Party, particularly as they relate to the recent conviction for money laundering of Dr. Doyin Okupe, who until recently was a Director General of the presidential campaign for the Labour Party. We welcome you for joining, and we are delighted that you've joined us, and we look forward to this really thrilling conversation, or series of conversations actually, with you regarding developments in Nigerian politics. Welcome.
All right. That was a good one. So, all right. Where did we start from today?
Well, why don't we start with I mean, there's a whole lot happening in Nigeria politically, right?
Mhm.
There is obviously a poll that just came out from Nigeria, and I'd like to read a few of the findings of that poll. So I'm reading from Premium Times Nigeria, perhaps Nigeria's leading online publication. And the headline reads, again, poll projects Peter Obi to win 2023 elections. The story begins, excuse me. Labour Party's Peter Obi is still projected to win Nigeria's 2023 presidential election, according to a new poll commissioned by ANAP Foundation. The nationwide poll shows a significant lead taken by Mr. Obi, with Bola Tinubu of the All Progressives Congress and Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, respectively, trailing him. Rabiu Kwankwaso of the New Nigeria People's Party emerged as a distant fourth behind Mrs. Tinubu and Abubakar. Conducted in early December, the results showed 23% of voters willing to vote for Mr. Obi if the presidential election were to be conducted today, and 13% proposing to vote for Mr. Tinubu, who fell in second place. Mr. Abubakar came third with 10%, and Mr. Kwankwaso was a distant fourth with only 2% of voters proposing to vote for him. Quote, Mr. Peter Obi's 10% lead at this stage is significant, but not sufficient to separate him from a leading pack of candidates scoring 13%, 10%, and 2%, said Atedo Peterside, the president and founder of ANAP Foundation. He continues, undecided voters and those who prefer not to reveal their preferred candidate add up to a whopping 29% and 23% respectively. The gender split of undecided voters shows that 38% of women are undecided versus 21% of male voters. The percentage of registered voters or voters with a permanent voters card as of December is 90% in the Northeast, 89% in the Southwest, and 88% in the South-South. The lowest voter registration percentages were recorded in the North Central with 87%, Northwest with 86%, and the Southeast with 84%, the report said. Continuing, the percentage of voters refusing to disclose the name of their preferred candidate has increased sharply from 15% to 23%, making it difficult for us to ascertain if any of the candidates has picked up significant momentum between September and December 2023, Mr. Peterside said in a statement sent to Premium Times. The foundation had commissioned a poll in September that tipped Mr. Obi to win the election, with Mr. Tinubu and Mr. Abubakar finishing second and third positions, respectively. When asked if religion would affect the choice of respondents, data gathered showed that 15% of the respondents replied in the affirmative to religion influencing their choice of candidates, but 81%, on the other hand, responded that their choices were not being influenced by religion, the report added. On ethnicity, 10% of the respondents noted that ethnicity informed their choice of candidates, while 86% said their choices were not influenced by ethnicity. The top 5 reasons why voters are more inclined to vote in the forthcoming election are the need to tackle security, that's 35% of voters or potential voters, economy 26%, unemployment 10%, poverty alleviation 7%, and education 6%. Overall, 71% of the respondents believe the presidential candidates should compulsorily participate in a televised debate and or town hall meeting, with the debates town hall meetings spanning across topics like their manifestos, competence checks, and personality recognition, among others. So these are some of the top findings of this poll. So I'd like to begin with a kind of a statement, if you like. So ANAP, Atedo Peterside, who is a founder, has strong credentials, especially in the banking sector, and strong credentials in the business world. So he's not one of those pollsters, and we've seen that in recent elections in Nigeria, especially in governorship elections, there have been so-called polling companies that simply seemed out to produce whatever result their clients wanted them to produce. So this is a poll that is to be taken with a measure of seriousness because of at least the person who is behind it. Having said so, I was in a conversation earlier today with a friend of mine, and he raised a series of questions. So one of the most pertinent questions he asked was whether the polls were heavily concentrated in urban areas, in other words, in cities like Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Enugu, Kanu, or whether the pollster was able to also poll voters in the rural areas of Nigeria. There is no question at all that in cities, people tend to have more access to social media, and clearly Peter Obi is dominant on social media. So I'm curious to find to discover, like as my friend said, what the polling is like when you go to outside of the main cities in Nigeria, whether Peter Obi continues to have that kind of dominant performance. And I do understand that there's actually a pollster who done work in the rural parts of Nigeria and who found the same trends that Peter Obi was leading, but with narrower margins and so on. So it's very interesting. And I think that it sort of jibes with what you and I have been projecting in some ways on this podcast. I think that Obi is a very fortunate candidate. Fortunate in the sense that he started out running a different kind of campaign, running a campaign that focused on issues. And because of that, young people have cottoned up to him, if you like, and adopted him as their candidate. So you see this groundswell of obedience all over social media. So if the election were to be conducted on social media, I'd say the other two or three contending candidates might as well just give up and move on, because B is clearly dominant. But I'm not writing off the APC's Tinubu, even though we've been on record on this podcast calling for him to quit the race and to quit because he's become an embarrassment to Nigeria. Our most recent episode before this one spoke about just the embarrassment that he became the charlatan of Chatham House in his appearance there, where he couldn't even take on questions, but instead had to distribute questions to those who accompanied him to this venerable British institution. I'm also not quite going to write off. So I'm not going to write off Tinubu, because he is the candidate of the current ruling party in Nigeria. I think that because of the state of Nigeria, that Nigerians are particularly determined that the forthcoming election should not be rigged. Okay, so I think that the usual incumbency factor is not going to be significant as it's been in past elections. Even so, I expect it to be effective to some degree, that the ruling party in the end controls the security agencies, controls the police, and these agencies are often used as instruments for the rigging of elections. I think that Atiku Abubakar's position is a bit more shaky, which is reflected in the polling numbers. I think that the fracturing of the PDP has dealt serious blows to Atiku's ambition to be president. I mean, quite apart from Atiku's own inherent deficits as a candidate, that he's linked to Obasanjo's government. And for me, that government was steeped in corruption. Somehow, Obasanjo has become a wily fox, if you like, and has seemed to shed the skin of corruption and encumbered Atiku with that skin. So there are a lot of people who remember the depth of corruption during Obasanjo's regime tend to see Atiku as the embodiment of that corruption. But I would say that Obasanjo was just as deeply implicated in what went on in that government. So there are all kinds of questions. The integrity of the polls, the spread of the polls, whether the polls are capturing the sentiments in the rural areas, and ultimately whether Muhammad Buhari, the incumbent president, is going to stand by his promise to allow free, credible elections to hold. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. But the whole thing about poll is it's cool, it's nice. Polling is a business. That's just the reality. Whether anybody likes it or not, it's a business, and it's a business clearly that has made its way into Nigeria. So, is it always polls are essentially people trying to get a data set of what they would say are the social situation of a country as pertaining to a certain question. And it gets eyeballs, it gets people paying attention. So there's typically revenue. There's typically this thing to be generated from it. All this to say is it's a business irrespective of what comes out of the poll. As long as people can take a look at it and be like, well, these guys seem to have followed some set of standards for the poll. It's going to have this thing. So that's this thing. Next thing is just a question of, how good is the polls? What are the parameters they use? I know I made the joke last time that I said it in Igbo that Nigerians they don't care about polls, which is true. So I was listening to somebody ask the question, well, these guys are doing polls. Are they going to capture Obinna in the village? Even though I felt it was kind of like, I think that's more of a prevalent thought. Are you going to capture Obinna in the village or this thing? So, essentially, a poll is not capturing everybody. It doesn't. What you capture is a workable sample size. So you have to look for a way of including people like Obinna in the deepest part of the villages. Not Obinna himself, but somebody who can be representative of the way he sees, the way he or her or she Obinna Ngozi in the village, or Adamu or Miriam in the village, or Kemi or Kule in another village, or a whole bunch of, so it has to be somebody, you have to be able to so how much did it capture the essence of the soul of the question? Is, if I was putting my own words, right? How much does this poll capture the soul of the question? What's the mood of people in regards to which way they will vote? were the elections held at the time of the poll? How much can it? How much did it? What's the sample size? What are the control mechanisms? We have problems in polls in America, but that's a different place. This is a different place to Nigeria. You're bound to have a different set of problems. Maybe the Nigerian polls could be more accurate. On the serious side, yeah, sure. Maybe it could be more accurate. It's possible. It's also possible that it could even be the most inaccurate set of polls man has ever seen before. So I've got no clue. Yeah. So, but all we know is that it, as a business, is functioning. That's just the truth of the matter, because we're here talking about the poll, right? So, yeah, and all these guys are all in the race. Tinubu is the front runner because of the power of, largely the power of incumbency. I don't see what else it be.
Again, if Nigeria were a rational place, if Nigeria were a rational space, I would not say that the power of incumbency is helping Tinubu, because Nigeria has not seen a more disastrous president than Muhammad Buhari. He's been a failure on almost every sector, every sector that counts in Nigeria. Buhari has failed. So so to the extent that there is an incumbency factor, I think that functions only to the extent that Buhari decides, or the ruling party decides, that they are going to rig the elections. And then if they're going to rig the elections, if they decide to rig the elections, then they have to come up against Nigerian institutions to start with, whether those institutions are willing to go along with it. So if the police, if the security agencies see that the government is as unpopular as it is, and they'll be living in outer space not to see it, would they lend themselves, even with instructions from the presidency, to a plot to rig the elections on behalf of Tinubu? I would think that what's going to happen is what happened in 2015 when Goodluck Jonathan was running for re-election. And clearly the PDP at that point wanted to manipulate the security agencies, but I think that there was an undermining of such instructions from within those agencies, which is how Buhari found himself in office to start with. So, it's just, there are some people who see Tinubu as the front runner, but when he's deemed to be the front runner because of the power of incumbency, I'll say that he actually, in my view, and it's possible that Nigerians are absolutely irrational voters, right? But so it's only an irrational person who will say, this government, I've suffered terribly under this government, so I'm going to reward the government with my vote, so I'll continue to suffer. Okay? Otherwise, if Nigerians are deemed rational and to pursue their self-interest, I think that they're going to look at this government and say, enough.
Well, I mean, you could say that, yeah, people are, to some degree, there'll be quite a number of irrational people who, for educative values, I guess, the way we see things, right? For educative values, which I think is something we'll get to with the David Umahi, right, for today. Umahi, right? Educative values right from the moment the British came in, and their intentions actually when coming in. What they said, what they wrote was going to be their, it's not what I think, is what they wrote, was going to be their intentions, which is the start of it. And since then, we've carried it out the same way. I'm not saying Nigerians don't have agency. I'm just telling you the landscape. It's just continuation of what's been there. So you have a whole bunch of people who they see things in a certain way. They rationalize. To some people, they are irrational, right? So you just believe, oh, this guy is there. that to me is a level of irrationality. This guy is there. God has given you the power, so you must remain there, even though I'm dying. And even though you're not a king anyway. So, that's a level of irrationality. Somebody that is not like, but the other level of some people rationalize in a different way, right? Their own rational thinking is that, look, man, we don't want an Igbo person, which, sometimes I say it in a very harsh way when I say, this, it's equivalent to anti-Semitism or racism or, whatever isms you choose to add. But some people, their rationality, essentially, this is the African rationality. Essentially, it's that you sit down and then you're like, all right, I don't want an Igbo person there. I don't want, and we might want to trivialize it and be like, no, even when you're overseas, it's very dominant. Some of the worst things that have happened to me living abroad didn't come from any other person, but a Nigerian from a different ethnic group, pretty much. And you see with people when some of us watch sports and people ask us like, why are you watching the sports? This guy's Yoruba, or this guy is, like, it's really a thing with people, right? It's really a thing with people in Nigeria for those who don't understand how deep it runs. So there are people who rationalize things that way. As far as they are concerned, the value they place on life, on their life, is purely from a cannibalized ethnic lens. It's my ethnic group and yours is my competitor. Absolutely. And you see it in writers. It's nothing new. I'm not saying something that is new. Achebe wrote it in The Trouble with Nigeria. It talks about how Awolowo is great for the Yorubas, which is true objectively, whether you like it or not. But the problem with Awolowo is not that he wanted his people to be great, is that he saw the Igbos as people that needed to be subdued for his people to be great, and not that there was there's so much cake at the top. Again, you go read A Man for the People. It's actually a very quick read if you want to. He wrote that book, I think, in 67. I can't remember what it was, or 70, early 70s. 66, right? So it's a long time. We're going to 46 years that he wrote that book. 47 years next year. So, and it's still prevalent till tomorrow. It's 7 years after Nigeria's independence that book was written. And there's so many other things. If you go back in the archival records, you'll see so many of these. There's still that back and forth between a lot of Yorubas have been educated in that regard. I'm not saying everybody or the majority. I'm telling you just as an example. But that's the way people rationalize it. That, Igbos need to be, because that's the only way we'll get to. And it's not actually, not to go too far away from this is a continental thing. But even if you went to Europe and we had that conversation, it was there in Europe. It is there in Europe till tomorrow. It's been there for the longest period of time. So you can't really sit down and say it's something unusual that, it fell out of somebody. It's not original thoughts. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not, even if you disagree or agree that, this is Awolowo, this was an Awolowo or Ahmadu Bello's thinking. There's nothing original about that thought. It's been there in Europe. Certain ethnic groups want to succeed. You need to listen, and it's a lot more of a deeper conversation, obviously. So I'm not going to go into that unless people want us to go into that at a deeper level. But yes, it's there. So that's the rationale for a lot of people. They rationalize things that way. The value they place on that hovers above every other thing, to the point of a religious value. They don't even just have it as a value. They have it as a religious value. They have it as the beginning of their morality, that certain ethnic groups should not be in certain places. And it works in some degree. For some ethnic groups, it works a lot more. For others, it works a lot less. But it does work in almost every ethnic group in Nigeria, pretty much, right? So there's always people they would love to see to hate. And obviously the ones that the biggest targets typically are the Igbos. Let me not use the Igbos. So that's the value people place on that. So that's something that people could sit down and say, look, what we want is a Tinubu, even though clearly this man should not even be the chairman of his village group. At this point, he doesn't seem to be doing well. And maybe it's a temporal thing. I don't know. I've got no, but he's a front runner. God puts him there. Polls are showing that. It is what it is. Atiku is there. He's running tough. Kwankwaso is there. He's running tough. Obi is there. He's running tough. No matter what people say or feel about any of these guys, they are in the race. I think 4 of them. I think Kwankwaso can win Kano and Kaduna. He has real, authentic, dedicated followers. Peter Obi too has dedicated followers. I know they seem noisy, and a lot of them seem that like they're overseas, but don't be fooled. There are a lot of people in Nigeria from different ethnic groups, a lot of them that believe in his candidacy. And Tinubu has his own authentic followers, right? So how much did the polls capture it? We will find out sometime early in March. We'll see. But I would take it seriously, but I'll take it with a half a grain of salt, maybe a quarter of a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, let me. Yeah, I not necessarily push back, but I think that we need nuance in the analysis that you've just done. I do know that after the Nigerian Civil War, that there's been a deep-seated distrust of the Igbo in sectors, different sectors of Nigeria. But I want to emphasize that Nigeria suffers from ethnic collectivism. And you sort of made a point that was very poignant and very powerful when you said that for a lot of people, our moral anchor is ultimately in our ethnicity, begins with our ethnicity. We sort of mistake. So some years ago, I gave a lecture where which I entitled "Toward an Ethnicity of Values." So I was urging Nigerians to begin to articulate their ethnicity based on ethics. People who share your ethical values should be deemed to belong to your collectivity, rather than people who are, because again, we have a country where every ethnic group in Nigeria, everyone has its unfair share of idiots, of fools, of thieves, of embezzlers of public funds, of wreckers of the nation and of their own particular spaces that they govern. But every sector of Nigeria also has wonderful people. So I don't want to give the impression that the Igbo are necessarily just the victims of everybody jumping on us. The worst enemy of the Igbo are the Igbo themselves. When you think about it, and I'm actually heartened that in this particular iteration, this political iteration, that you find a strong faction of Afenifere saying that in the interest of equity, that they are supporting the Igbo candidate. You also find in the Middle Belt and even in some sectors of the North, you find people making the same point. So it's a way of saying, and by the way, I was struck by the finding of the poll on ethnicity and religion as factors. They seem to me, I think it's between 10 and 13% of people said that they were influenced in their choice of candidate by ethnic or religious factors. If that is true, then this is really, really impressive, admirable development in Nigeria, because we have a country where all too often even highly certificated people, I used to say highly educated people, and it occurred to me that there are people with PhDs who have little education. So I just say that they have great certificates. They have a first degree, master's degree, and PhD. But for me, the central quality of enlightenment of somebody who is truly educated is a person's ability to think critically. And I have said, which has often placed me in the minority, I have said to people for years, every election cycle, Ohanes and Igbo and some other Igbo groups will say it's the turn of the Igbo people. And I said, no, I don't believe in the turn of the Igbo. Nor do I believe in the turn of the Yoruba or the Hausa or the Fulani or the minority groups in the Niger Delta or in the Middle Belt to produce a president. For once, I think it's the turn of a competent leadership. Nigeria needs competence. Nigeria needs a few good men and women for a change running its affairs. And we can find those good men and women in just about any ethnic group. And if an Igbo candidate proposed himself for leadership, and I felt that he or she did not have the mettle, the qualifications, the credentials to be a good leader, I'll dismiss such a person and choose, say, a Fulani and a Shekiri, a Fulfulde. Fulani is Fulfulde, obviously, a Yoruba candidate who has demonstrably better credentials. So anyway, so it's just that, yes, in the past there has been this profound mistrust of the Igbo, especially following the Civil War. And, excuse me, I often sort of, what I say to people, and I said this to my Igbo friends as well, and I might as well declare my bona fides, because ultimately people go and find out and ascribe all kinds of meaning. My wife is a Yoruba American. Her mom is an American. Her father was the late Professor Basafunwa, and some people find that out, and they, in the case of one woman who was a critic of mine on Facebook, she said, "Oh, your writing is so Yoruba-ish because you are married to a Yoruba woman." And I felt that this was just extraordinary stupidity, because I didn't know that when you married a wife, her people would then say to you, "You must support her political positions." Nobody ever told me that. And Obasanjo was very close to my father-in-law. Obasanjo attended my traditional wedding. I knew Obasanjo and was close to Obasanjo before he became president. But as president, Obasanjo was atrocious. And despite the fact that I knew him, I was one of his fiercest critics. I was, for that matter, Ngige Chris Ngige was somebody that I got to know through some of my friends who were very close to him. And yet when he was rigged in as governor of Anambra State, I was fierce in insisting that he should not be allowed to hold office. When Peter Obi ultimately regained his office, he and I were close for some time, but there were actions of his that I felt did not measure up to expectations, and I went after him. And that's the way it should be, that we shouldn't conduct our public affairs based on emotional attachments, based on ethnicity or friendship, that we should go on principles, So I think that if the poll that we're talking about has captured is credible at all, then it's very heartening that between as low as 10 and 13% of Nigerians now say that they are not going to factor in ethnicity or religion in casting their votes next year. That would be wonderful, because your religion does not produce a good leader. Your ethnicity does not guarantee one. So the ethnicity of values is really what Nigerians need. For me personally, those who are close to me are those who believe in doing the right thing, and I have Igbo ethnic people in my ethical group. I have Fulani, Hausa, Yoruba, Efik, Ibibio, Ishekiri, Urobo. People from every part of Nigeria want a better Nigerian. For me, that's who the people with whom I like to identify.
Yeah. I mean, at some point in time, we're going to talk about some of the ethnic agitations in Nigeria, and maybe talk about some of the actors in the field. Mm-hmm. But, it's not a question of, to say what you're saying, it's not a question of sitting down and being like, the Igbos are victims. I don't think Igbos generally go about seeing themselves as victims. I think Igbo people go about seeing themselves as possibly under threat, and justifiably so. You go back to even the initial political crisis in Nigeria, talking of the 52 riots, 51 riots, where, what they call it, action group goes to campaign in Kano and at the, what ends up becoming, not MPN, I was going to say MPN from the 70s, what ends up becoming, what's the
UPN?
UPN and Kodif, the Balewa party.
The Balewa?
Saldana.
The
MPN is 70s.
No, MPN.
Was it in the 60s?
Yeah.
I don't know. We're looking at his governor of Ebonyi State.
Yeah, isn't it something? I mean, I don't know what you thought about it, but I will share my thoughts. When a friend of mine called me and said that Governor David Umahi of Ebonyi State had announced that he was naming an uncompleted stadium called an Olympic Stadium after the late Nigerian dictator, a particularly brutal dictator, Sani Abacha, that he was naming the stadium after him. My response was one of incredulity. I said, no, this is not true. But a friend sent me a link to the report. And then I went and Googled it and found the report, in fact, in several Nigerian newspapers. I've been puzzled. Abacha was never an attractive leader when he was in office. Abacha is long dead, died in 1997. Abacha's memory is not one of these stellar memories in Nigeria's public harvest of memories. So why would the governor of Ebonyi State name a major stadium after this really unimpressive, brutal, and brutalizing leader? The only speculation that made sense, which still is nonsensical, is that Umahi, who is going to end his second term as governor of Ebonyi State next year, perhaps thinks that naming a stadium after Abacha would somewhat make him an attractive candidate in the north for a future national political office. If it is Umahi's calculation, I'm truly, truly disappointed in the man. He should know better. And the fact that he apparently doesn't know better is it's galling, to say the least. You know, yeah. There is no reason at all, no way in which the naming of anything after Sani Abacha is justified.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, man. I mean, when I heard that, I was kind of surprised. I mean, first things first, David Umahi has been governor of Ebonyi State now for almost 8 years. I think would be the beginning of next summer, right? May 29th of next summer will be 8 years. Mm-hmm. I think so as much as it's an objective standard, people feel Umahi has been one of the best governors in the East within that period. Maybe the best governor Ebonyi State has ever had. As a state that was actually created in 96. And by the way, Abacha died June 8th, 1998. I remember that day.
That's true.
That was World Cup period. Mm-hmm. And Nigeria was at the World Cup then. I can't remember. Nigeria was headed to the World. Nigeria was at the World Cup then. So, they created the state. I remember, when they created that state, they created Gombe. I remember going with my father to go visit the newly appointed military administrator of Gombe State then. He was in Bauchi during that period. So he went from Gombe to Bauchi. It was like a 2-hour drive. He referenced all that Abacha created Gombe. Abacha created Ebonyi State. So Abacha was sent from heaven. I'm just looking at what the guy referenced. Yeah. And that's why people from Ebonyi State should be thankful to Abacha, which I don't understand why creating a state that's a whole other ludicrous thought to feel like all the state creation in Nigeria is useful. But overall, he's been one of the effective governors. I'm not saying he's not corrupt, by the way. There's literally nobody I can point to that is not. He's a member of he's the only governor from the Southeast that is a member of the APC as the ruling party of the state. So clearly he wants to ingratiate himself.
Which party he joined actually after his election.
Right? So he wants to ingratiate himself with them. I think he also, like you said, he feels the political calculations are that Tinubu would win. And after Tinubu wins, there will be a stronger case for an Igbo president, which is where his mind is. One set of this thing, which I feel also actually that's what Soludo said. So his mind is there.
I think that's also Soludo's calculation in some way, yeah.
So, but the other part to my thing is this, right? His brother apparently is a retired major general, and his brother apparently, according to every account given, brother apparently was part of Abacha's torture state suppression arm.
Sword, yeah.
Yep. His brother was deeply involved in the adoption of the Ogoni Nine, which, you know, you can have your views. The real story of the Ogoni Nine, they are not necessarily faultless, by the way. Although executing them I don't think it was in any way justified.
Absolutely uncalled for, yeah.
But, you know, their actions did lead to the killings of 2 traditional rulers in Ogoni land. You know, again, those guys too shouldn't have been killed, but apparently what the way they had been selling out this thing. So it's a whole Ijeoma case and all that. And, you know, for some people, they also hold Ken Saro-Wiwa highly. One, he was a good writer, but 2, he was also very controversial in the way he wrote about certain things. And I'm saying that to reference this. He saw Abacha as his friend because of Abacha's actions during the Civil War.
Oh, you mean Ken Saro-Wiwa? Oh, yeah.
He welcomed Abacha inside this thing. So that played a role. Eventually, Abacha, you know, when Abacha came into Port Harcourt during the Civil War and all that, he welcomed Abacha and he saw Abacha as his friend, and he felt he could do whatever he wanted. So when Abacha had to deal with him, he dealt with him, and part of the people that dealt with him and apparently tortured him was David Umahi's brother. Apparently, so that's a connection. So you can tell if you were that close to Abacha, there's a reasonable case to be made that Umahi himself benefited financially from being close to Abacha. I think we could almost 100%. From everything I've seen and I've read, I can almost confidently say 100%. The source of his good fortune came from his brother's relationship with Abacha and his brother's willingness to be a very brutal actor against Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Yeah.
Saying all this because I'm sure some people in Niger Delta or some Ijaw people from those areas would point out, yeah, they remember because they hold Ken Saro-Wiwa highly, who was very, what's a charitable way to say it with Ken Saro-Wiwa? And he went to Government College Umuahia, and he had a bone to pick. He had a bone to pick with Igbo people. Let's just put it that way, right? As a charitable way to say, and you could go read his book if you want. So some people have bones with that, but clearly, and all this matters in his rationale, for instance, right? In his calculations, I'm sure he doesn't feel like his brother's history and his history for this thing is going to be hidden anyway. So his best calculation is for him. He wants to be president. He needs to ingratiate himself more with the North than with the people in the South, because some people would always bring up his relation, his activity, his brother's activities, and details to some degree his own in this thing. So that's probably what's at play in his mind. That I would say, at least I think it weighs on his decision making.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't think those political instincts are smart in any way, shape. I don't care what your background is. You're better off. If that's your history, that's your history. You're better off standing up and going through it. If at best as you can. I feel all these guys as well, and this is probably the last point I'll make. All these guys that are sitting down and looking at, okay, Tinubu is going to win. Again, this is the way I see them seeing things. And in 8 years, there'll be an Igbo president. I think the main fact that if that is your calculation, by the way, if this is what you're thinking about, which I think it's a stupid way of thinking. I don't think you should be thinking like that. If this is what you're thinking, already Tinubu possibly winning rather, is already breaking the mold, right? So why do you feel in 8 years it has to be an Igbo person? I don't really get it. Like, what's the point? If this is what you're thinking. Personally, I don't believe in any of. I would rather there was no Igbo person and the country was working great, right?
Yeah.
Or whoever it is that is there is working great. That would be my own preference. That's me, right? But if this is what you're thinking, if you're sitting there like, yeah, which is what Soludo literally wrote in his letter, that you don't have a chance, come back here and build a structure, and then in 8 years, essentially, you don't even come for the Ohanes Igbo meeting, which is what he was writing to Peter Obi in his letter, right? Or writing to Peter Obi supporters, right? If this is what you're thinking, and on what basis are you standing on that? Why would it be an Igbo guy's turn in 8 years' time? I don't get it. No, it doesn't make any rational sense what you're saying, So that's probably his distance. So, and yeah, with that, we can. What's next? What was the other thing we want to talk? Oh yeah,
we want to talk about Doyin Okupe. So and I think we've had a really exciting series of conversations today. So Doyin Okupe a few days ago was found guilty by Justice, I think, Ijeoma Ojukwu, of money laundering when he was part of President Olusegun Obasanjo's government. And he was sentenced to jail for a 2-year jail sentence or to pay a fine in the alternative. And I think it was a really sort of inconsequential fine of something like 500,000 naira on the first count, another 500,000 naira on another count. So I fully expect, everybody expected that he was not going to spend a night in jail, that he was going to pay this fine. But Doyin Okupe, for the record, I knew him when he was a doctor. I was a young journalist in Nigeria, and he actually ran a wonderful clinic in Obalende, Lagos, Obalende roundabout, with I think 2 or 3 other doctors, and they all, when I visited them in the hospital, in their clinic, all of them well dressed in their suit and so on. And Doyin Okupe's political travail, I think, or travail in public office, is one of those stories about the tragedy of our country. Doyin Okupe might have made much more difference, a much more positive contribution to Nigeria had he remained in medicine. Okay, but Nigeria is a country where if you want a certain level of wealth, you have to leave your professional pursuit and go into politics. So here he was, a man who might have excelled as a politician, as a medical doctor, going to the political arena, served Obasanjo as senior special assistant on media matters, and ultimately ended up receiving massive sums of money, I think totaling 702 million naira, some of it from the National Security NSA, National Security Administration in Nigeria. So he was running Peter Obi's political campaign. He was a director general of that campaign. And by most accounts, he was effective in that role. So it became a test for Obi's campaign, whether he was going to be fired or if they were going to look the other way and let him continue. To his credit and to Obi's credit, he put in his letter of resignation, and Obi issued a very gracious response, thanking him for the effectiveness of the work he'd done for the campaign, but accepting his decision to disengage from that campaign. And that's the right thing. It's really, again, as somebody who once counted Doyin Okupe as a friend, I'm really heartbroken that this fine doctor that I knew, and he was drawn to me because of my writing as a young journalist, and I will go to his office. Sometimes I'll go to his home in the Maryland area of Lagos, and we'll spend hours, talking about political issues, talking about the fortunes and misfortunes of Nigeria, it's painful to see that such a man would then become part of the problem, part of the trouble with Nigeria. To quote Chinua Achebe's book of the same title, but it's a right thing. Then of course, the other point that needs to be made is, of course, that there are so many people in the political arena, including candidates, who are much more corrupt, who have contributed to Nigeria's economic and political ruination, who are still there. But the point has to be fairly made that once the courts have found you guilty, then the question is settled. So you should step aside, and he has. And he should really disappear from the political space. For me, his ultimate rehabilitation will come from returning to medicine, where you would help people. But my suspicion is that it's not an option that Dr. Okupe is going to be thinking about seriously, which is tragic.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way they handled it was, whatever may or may not have happened behind the scenes, the way they handled it was, it showed a possible administration that might be willing to have some level of ethics, some sort of ethics at least, right? You were in court, they didn't, some other, if you're in America, America's a different case. Again, I would always say it, want to dig into it and dig on the differences. But let's say you're in America, right? Even when you're in court alone, you should technically step down.
You're expected to quit your office, yeah.
Step down, go face your court case, and if you're found not guilty, the powers that be choose to bring you back, so be it. But that is I won't put it to morals, I'll put it to ethics. That should be ethically inherent to people. Yeah. Because it shouldn't be about it shouldn't be about you, right? So to some degree he's found some ethics somewhere. Or let me say, at least he's displayed some ethics.
I mean, I don't think he had much wiggle room. If Obi is riding this wave as a different kind of politician, there was no way Obi could have retained him. A Tinubu, if he worked for Tinubu might have retained him, and his press people would have made statements saying, is he the only corrupt person, or he's going to appeal the judgment, so we trust him. Maybe an article could have made the case. But if Obi had decided to keep the man even for one more day, it would have been decisively disastrous for his campaign. So
I agree,
and I'm sure that Doyin Okupe recognized that, so he put in his letter of resignation, and that's really what future presidents in Nigeria who are serious about fighting corruption should do. They should have their public officials write a preemptive letter of resignation, which the president or the government should keep in their files. And when they fall short, when they commit, they're accused of ethical lapses, you can just date the letter and say, hey, this person has offered his resignation and it's been accepted. So that's a gentle way of saying to people, you are fired, without saying you are fired. You say that somebody has stepped down.
Yeah. Well, it shows when, if it was the other two campaigns, I'm not even trying to say anybody. I'm just telling you, maybe, look, like I've always said to start with, I don't even believe in direct representation. I think the more authoritative this thing is, the better, because it's easier to get from point A to point B. So, but a lot of times is all these, you sit down with all these controversies.
I know we've talked about this in the past.
I know. You sit down with all these controversies.
Yes.
So imagine if it was these other campaigns now, what will you be hearing? You'll be hearing all these controversies till election. It's like, country is 200 million people. If somebody has a case or something, it's understandable. He may be innocent. I don't know. Nigeria is a very interesting contraption, right?
He's no longer innocent. I mean,
he's been convicted, right?
He's been convicted. So
maybe he might feel.
I mean, even if he appeals, the status quo is that he's guilty until the judgment is vacated by a different government.
All right. So he's guilty. He might feel. He might rightly or wrongly, I don't know, feel the judgment is wrong. Now you've been convicted. It's incumbent upon you to take up your case and do what you need to do and try and get and let the country move along. Right?
Yeah.
So
well, I think we've had a run of it. It's been a very brisk and in a lot of ways bracing conversation. It's been for me an enjoyable episode, and it's always a delight to have you, our listeners, tune in and check in. And please, we always appreciate your feedback. Write your responses to the podcast, write your responses to the column, be in touch, be engaged, especially young people, because this podcast is meant to reach, to be in contact with the young. So we wish you a Merry Christmas, and hopefully we'll see you very quickly in the new year. Have a brilliant festive season.
Yep, have a brilliant one. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa.
Whatever you celebrate,
Happy Hanukkah.
Have a happy one.
so if you're listening after the period, then hope definitely you had an enjoyable holiday season and you start your year. You've started your year on a bright and a brilliant note. So
wonderful.
Yes.
Have a brilliant one. Bye now.